I don't, this is not a moment when I can preach a straightforward sermon or even say anything remotely sensible. And so I guess I want to say a bit more of what I said last night, try and do that in a compact way, and end with two quotations which some of you ought to know by heart by now because I've used them so often over the last 5 years, and both of which are going to feature at the end of my sermon in my putting in 2 weeks' time. So there is nothing original here. But I want to just reflect for a few minutes, I guess, on mission and ministry at Christ Church. It's not really the document you've got in front of you. That's quite analytical and quite serious. I mean, this is quite serious, I hope, as well. But it's by way of thank you in the context of what for me has been the happiest 5 years of my ministry. And I guess one of the quotations I want to put here, which is not a quotation I've used before, is a quotation from a local head teacher to her governing body, when she berated her governing body by saying, you know, you really are very foolish with your money because you pay me to be a lunchtime supervisor, and that's not a good use of my time. And many of the clergy I've met as Archdeacon over the last year, and indeed many teachers and head teachers that I've met, would say the same, that they spend an awful lot of their life doing other people's jobs. One of the absolute delights of the last 5¼ years has been I spent my time doing my job. And you cannot imagine what an extraordinary feature of ministry that is. Okay, when I was Vicar of Scotsford for 10 years, in a tiny, battered, extreme inner city community, there was kind of no choice. But what's been so life-giving here, and continues to be so forever, it seems to me, is the way in which people have the ability to be given and to take responsibility, to live up to that, and to exercise ministries in a way I couldn't have dreamt of. And I want to say a few very sort of obvious thank yous. This is very dangerous. I mean, the Father Ted Christmas special is one of my favourite shows of all time. Those of you who know it, starts with the great moment of a whole series of Catholic priests getting lost in the largest lingerie store in the Republic of Ireland. And then Father Ted rescues them from that. And as a result, he gets awarded the greatest honour ever, a Golden Cleric Award. All this seems to happen on Christmas Day, which is very surprising, but there we are. And Father Ted then spends night after night writing his speech for the Golden Cleric Award, which is basically how he's better than anybody in the world and names everybody he's fallen out with over his ministry. So the joy is I don't have to do that at all at this. That's not the point. But I do recognise the danger of trying to be comprehensive because, of course, you miss people out. But I actually want to use the themes of sowing the seed. And if you don't know what that is, I promise it's in that little handout today, that we've actually worked through in the last 5 or so years. Because what's been brilliant, and this is about you or about us together, has been not that simply that people like doing the glamorous things, but people have been brilliant at doing the unglamorous things. I just think of Frank sitting for hours on end in the finance office and still smiling. And after the first year here, when I discovered we hadn't presented accounts for 4 years, having Frank do that is great, and long may you enjoy it in that finance office. But that whole theme of buildings and assets, which isn't glamorous. It's about bricks and mortar, quite literally. It's about bank accounts. And in fact, my last act as vicar is going to be to sign the mandate for the change of signatories on the bank accounts. You know, it's all that unglamorous stuff. But actually, if people aren't prepared to do that, no voluntary sector organisation, no church can actually get on with its business. And actually, there's an old word from the New Testament for that. I know that we make a big fuss about ordaining deacons, and that's fine. But if you examine what deacons do in the early church, they look after the money and the chattels and the things that need doing, right? So Frank Deacon, by name and by nature. But actually, I want to say, you know, Michael Lindley and his work, and Tony, and lots of different people who've actually taken responsibility for the buildings and the assets of this place has been wonderful. And actually means, as a Christian community, we can function in ways that are really quite remarkable. And so that's a big thank you to a whole team of people hidden often behind little office doors, but who've done a remarkable job. And of course, part of that is a vision for this building as an accessible place where we can continue to thrive and to flourish. The communications and outreach theme of sowing the seed, I guess, was a very interesting example of how vicars find it very difficult to let go of things they love doing. And all vicars do that, I'm afraid. All vicars do that. So the fact that I hadn't quite let go of the magazine and hadn't quite let go of the website is a condemnation of my inability to give those things away. But also my conviction that communications must stand somewhere close to the heart of an organisation, otherwise they're meaningless. If you do want to visit the Chelmsford Cathedral website, you'll see what I mean. Those of you who visited it. I mean, it was advertising Christmas 2012 until a few weeks ago, for goodness sake. No condemnation at all, but there's no input from the core leadership at all. And of course it reflects that. And I hope our website, which is now under various people's management, but actually continues to be a real ministry of this church, which has the core message of the gospel in there, not simply arrangements. Indeed, the way it's set up continues to do that. But that theme of communications and outreach, which you sometimes say, well, we never quite got the outreach bit right. And that may be true. And I do want you to treasure for the future, if you go back 4 or 5 years, where people were still talking about the memory of that church plant on Fairfax. Now, I think that needs to prod us continuously for the future. What does it mean to be out there, specifically as a Christian community? Doing what? What are they? There are all sorts of questions there. I don't know. Is it worship? Is it service in the community? It could be all sorts of possibilities. But to allow ourselves to be prodded for the future in thinking about out there, because that is the arena of God's major action, yes, and therefore of our discipleship. But I also want to note here a whole series of things that we do, of which I want us to be deeply proud. The bereavement support group that Petronella leads, do all the funeral follow-up. A crucial thing that came into being in the first couple of years here for me was the pastoral care team. And I want to pay tribute to Rachel Milnes for getting that going and to Yvonne for continuing that work. It was I felt, the first few funerals I took, I felt profoundly saddened by. Because they were all people who, when I talked to the relatives, said they were a lifelong member of Christ Church, and when she went into the home or into the hospital, they were forgotten. So it's slippy on the path outside. This is a health and safety issue, right? On the edge, have to come in this way today because they might fall over and break a leg, which would be a terrible legacy for me. I couldn't cope with that, right? But the whole way in which pastoral care has worked has meant I can have the absolute confidence that there's a net in place. In fact, there's much more than a net in place. And that actually, in funerals now, you don't encounter conversations of she was forgotten or he was forgotten. There's somebody visiting, somebody doing that very hidden ministry of simply being there for people, be it through home communion, be it through visiting. And that 15-strong team is an extraordinary asset in the best possible way for the life and ministry of this church. One of the confusing themes, in many ways, that we've had to work with is the word people. On the Sowing the Seed Day conference back in September 2009, thousands of people gathered around that theme because, of course, it could fit almost anything you wanted to say. But actually, it's been very important because what is this Christian community about except developing a sense of community so we can be able to be disciples? And everything, it seems to me, from that glorious swimming trip to Knaresborough Baths, which I think should be repeated. I thought it was an extraordinary afternoon. Those of you who didn't come, well, there'll be another opportunity, I'm sure, another year. To the social events we've had, to actually the ways in which people just learn to interact with one another, formally and informally. A building of sense of community, which is a constant work in progress, I know, a constant work in progress, but that's a real asset for us as we've learnt how to be that better, And the fourth theme was worship and learning. I've put these in the opposite order in the document you've got, but I want to end with worship and learning because in a sense that's our kind of job, isn't it? It's kind of our job. What's a Christian to do? To grow in discipleship through meeting the living God in worship and to grow through learning, not necessarily head learning, but heart learning. And I've been delighted with the way people responded to the learning thing. Brian kicked it off during the vacancy with Lent groups, and now we have an array of house groups, of learning opportunities and so forth, which continue into the future. And that's a precious gift we've shared. Now, okay, it's 60, 70 people in our congregation involved in one or other of those groups, which is great. It would be great if there were more. But actually, to see learning as a key theme, you constant need of renewal in encountering God, learning more about our Christian faith, and therefore being able to live it. And finally, in worship. I've loved the worship here. There are priests, and I've been one of them sometimes, who'd say actually organising worship and leading it is exhausting and not feeding. That has not been true here at all. This has been an absolute delight to be a member of this worshipping community and to know that I could be deeply at home in it. And we've developed in all sorts of different ways. And there are all sorts of opportunities for the future, some of which I've indicated on the process, on that piece of paper. Sunday worship has just been enormous fun. Wednesday mornings, it's been a delight to see how that's grown and flourished. And actually a special debt, which I know I've said before, but to those who've gathered morning and evening, say morning and evening prayer. I know how impossible my life would be if the day was not framed each day by meeting with fellow Christians to pray together. And that's been life-giving in the most extraordinary way. And to have the service last night basically as our normal evening prayer with a few sort of bells on was a lovely way of celebrating last night. And I want to say a few thank yous, therefore. I mean, I've said thank you to Frank, I've said thank you to the building group. I want to say a big thank you to Christine for the work she's done, very solo for a long time now at nurturing the choir. Rather magical, the way in which one whole group graduates to university and a whole group of not tinies, so that's the wrong word, isn't it, Owen? I didn't mean it like that. Smaller ones, children, begin to join the choir, and that's been lovely, and they need nurture and our support in that. I want to say a huge thank you to Elizabeth and her huge team of people who, as we spoke, we saw Cleo with the mic walking through there. The way in which we nurture young people, and actually the On the Edge group who are now meeting in the vestry, what a lovely initiative, because there were simply too many in the 12 plus age group to continue meeting where they were. And you know where they were meeting until a few months ago? In the cupboard in the parish centre, because it was the only space and that does not honour our young people at all. So the fact they're now using the vestry, I think, is a wonderful development of our work with young people, and that can only develop and grow. I want to say a huge thank you to all of those who've been involved in the ministry of worship, in whatever way that's worked, so in leadership, in reading, in leading intercessions, in leading all sorts of, just being part of this. And I want to say something very significant about the life and work of the parish centre. If I'm honest, when I first came here, this is not to do with me, I said, what's the parish centre for? And by and large, the response I got was, it's the way we pay our parish share from the rent. In fact, I discovered that wasn't true at all. That actually we weren't making any money at all out of the parish centre, so that wasn't true at all. And the way we paid our parish share was by selling houses, which is not a bad good plan at all, especially when the houses have run out. And what I've been deeply moved and delighted about in the ministry of the parish centre is that now the parish centre, which does actually make a profit, but that's not the point, is a key part of our mission and ministry as a church. We've become I like to say a 6-day-a-week church, because we try not to do things on Saturdays, because that's just too overwhelming. But if you've never sat in the parish centre on a Tuesday or Thursday or Wednesday and just see what goes on, it is beautiful. Particularly, our music ministry with dementia sufferers is a particular highlight. And I mean that in every way. I'm not saying anything. I mean, it is extraordinary on a Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, these wonderful choirs singing, the animation it brings. But actually, every day of the week, the way in which the parish centre is a place of life, mission and ministry. And the staff, the way in which, when people come for a party or a school event or the Dementia Forward Choir, whatever it is, they meet Christ Church and the mission and ministry of this church. I want to particularly thank Jill for that, but also everybody who's been involved in the repositioning of what's not a building asset, but a ministry asset. So that place has become a place of our mission and ministry, and its identity very clear indeed. And I guess that's it, because otherwise I will witter on forever and ever and ever. As you know, and I did at 8 o'clock. I was trying to prevent myself doing that. I do have a real special thank you to my clergy colleagues. I've been ordained 26 years now, and for only 5 of those years have I worked alone, and I know how tough that is. My first 5 years at Scotswood, the solo hero mentality kicks in, and that's not healthy for anybody. For the rest of that time, for 20 years, I've always had colleagues. But ironically, Even at a cathedral, I did not have colleagues such as I've had here, which has been a brilliant team to work with. I mean, you may doubt it, it's all right. Brian and Jeff, and of course Colin was still here when I arrived, and Yvonne's joined the team as a reader, and Arnold, and Helen. You know, we've even got a Methodist. And yes, I'm getting, yeah, thank you for your, they're trying to, and Clive, of course, has recently moved on to Barnsley. That's been a really powerful team. And we've not met so much to plan as to nurture. As Jeff says, we have discussions and then 3 months later something happens as a result of that discussion. But actually it's been a spiritually really enriching experience journeying with that ministry team. And if I've left anybody out, and I will have done, because if we were all here at once, we'd be a community of some 300 adults and 140 children. So it would be embarrassingly large. And I do recognise one of the difficulties about the way in which larger churches work is everybody complains they don't know anything, which is the point of Tony's thing at the beginning. One great writer on church growth has this great line. He says, bigger churches should always engage in redundant communication. You have to tell people things again and again and again. We've tried to do that, but you know. Above all, thank you for being here as part of this worshipping community, as people seeking to engage with God in worship and tell the story with your lives. 2 quotes then. I promise, 2 quotes. One which I've repeated endlessly, I'm sorry, but it's from the Glasgow Herald in 2003. The former leader of the Iona community, though, he was writing about the appointment of the first lay woman as the leader of the Scottish Presbyterian Church. There's this wonderful line. It's quite complicated, but I think it's a great line. He says, the church, for all its manifest sins, is the bearer of a story with transformative power at its heart. I'll say that one again. The church, for all its many sins, is the bearer of a story with the transformative power at its heart. And then he goes on to say, I've forgotten. Isn't that good? I've been using that quote for years. And I actually can't remember the second half of the quotation. So I'll just skip forward. I should write things down sometimes. It's age, you know. Being over 50 is very dangerous. Anyway, that's what I have to do. There's the first part of the quotation. Jeff actually gave me a line from Nehemiah last night, which was half a verse. So, you know, we're going on. But I will, and I'll read this. I'll read this poem, which you have heard endlessly. I know. My apologies. But I'm afraid I'm going to use this on the 2nd of February at Chelmsford too. John Medcalf, great Roman Catholic missionary priest in Latin America, who did go on holiday in Nidderdale, I discovered recently. I was talking to the Roman Catholic priest up in Nidderdale, and he said, oh yes, John Medcalf used to come here on holiday. But he died in Guildford, which, you know, for a Latin American missionary sounds, well, it's as bad as Essex, isn't it? Not that I intend to die in Essex, sorry. So here it is for the last time. But I still think, for all its crass poetry, this speaks to the values of the kingdom and the challenge to the church. I dream of a church where love and people are more important than stone and steeple. I dream of a church with an open door where no one is privileged except the poor. I dream of a church where milk and honey will flow more freely than power and money. I dream of a church where young and old will be inspired to change their world